Good morning, everyone. My name is Miss Amanda. I'm the principal at Education Imagine Academy, a virtual school here in Wichita Public Schools, and it is my pleasure to introduce Miss Shanae, who is the Director of Educational Programming at the Sedgwick County Zoo. Today, you guys are going to learn about the Prairie Puzzle, which is connecting conservation in our communities, a chickadee checkoff program. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Miss Carrie, who is doing our filming, and Miss Shanae. Please make sure, teachers, to put in the Q&A where you're streaming from, how many kids are in your class, your name, and if you guys have questions throughout the presentation, throw those into the Q&A, and we will have Miss Shanae answer them at the end of our program. Enjoy.
Well, good morning, everybody. We're so glad that you've joined us here at Sedgwick County Zoo. And today we are going to look at that prairie puzzle and help understand the Kansas connection to our prairie. Now, some of the things that I love to say about Kansas. Often people are like, oh, Kansas is boring. We don't have mountains. We don't have oceans. We don't have any of that kind of stuff. But we do have something that's amazing. We have the prairie. Prairies are more than just weeds. They're more than just open, empty spaces. Prairies have some of the most diverse habitat areas in the world, with animals that live below ground, on the ground, and above the ground that all depend on those prairie plants for survival. Now, again, I'm Shanae. I'm here at Sedgwick Zoo, and today we have our program on the Prairie Puzzle that's brought to you by the Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks and their Chickadee Checkoff program. That Chickadee Checkoff program is a great way that Wildlife and Parks can provide resources for people to learn about non-game wildlife. Non-game wildlife is a little tricky. So game wildlife are things like pheasants and deer, animals that people will hunt. Non-game wildlife are those animals that we don't traditionally hunt as we go. So the Chickadee Checkoff program is a great way that your adults, when they pay their taxes at the end of the year, can give just a little bit to help some of those wildlife and wild places in Kansas and help support some of those. Now, as we mentioned, here in the state of Kansas, we have 3 types of prairies. That's pretty special because not all states have all 3 prairies. That makes us unique. And I also like to tell folks that Kansas is the belly button of the United States. There's only one belly button. And guess what? What does your belly button do before you're born? It feeds you. What does Kansas do? We feed the world. So we are the belly button of the United States and the only one that can say that as they go. Now, in our Kansas prairies, as I mentioned, we have all 3 types of prairies. There's a short grass, a mixed grass, and a tall grass prairie. We're going to highlight those 3 different prairies and look at some of the formations that we can find in our state as we go. We're going to start out in western Kansas with those short grass prairies. Western Kansas is where we'll see those lowest prairies. Often buffalo grass are the most common of those prairie plants. Our shortgrass prairie plants generally don't get more than about a foot tall. And one of the neatest habitats in our western Kansas shortgrass prairie area is a place that's called the Arikara Break. Now you might say, Miss Shanae, what? The Arikara Break. Arikara is actually was named after the Arikara River, which is a Native American tribe that lived in that area. Arikara actually means horn because the Arikara Indian tribes wore bones in their hair, which made them look like they had horns. Now, you might still be saying, but Miss Shanae, I've been to western Kansas and I've never seen this. The 2 most common formations that we see there are Little Jerusalem, which is also called the Badlands of Kansas. So you don't need to go all the way up to South Dakota to see the Badlands. You can just head to western Kansas and see the same thing, just a little bit shorter. The Little Jerusalem was only about 36 miles long, so it's not nearly the same size as the Badlands in South Dakota, but there are Badlands. Now, the other thing that's interesting about the Jerusalem area is it's sometimes also called the Grand Canyon of Kansas. When you go up there and look at the different formations that are up there, it's pretty interesting what wind and water has done for those rock systems to make caverns and pillars and everything else. The other formation, which is pretty common in that area, is Monument Rock, or also called the Chalk Pyramids. These are an area that's on private lands, but what's great is that landowner allows you to go out and to explore certain areas and to learn about those as well. So we're going to focus again on that. We're up in the northwest part of Kansas right now. We've talked a little bit about some of the formations that you can see there. Let's talk a little bit about the plants too. When we think of our Kansas prairies, we think of grasses. We don't think of too many trees. There's not too many trees in western Kansas. But what surprises people is we do have cactus. So this is an area that you might find the prickly pear cactus. It's also an area where you might find yuccas as well. And then there's a really interesting plant called the sage. Sage are kind of a bushy plant. And in Little Jerusalem, there are some sage that are only found there in Kansas, and no other places in the state of Kansas can you find them. So a pretty interesting habitat. Now, if the habitat is that interesting, then we know the animals that live there have to be interesting as well. Now, guys, we're right here at our prairie dog habitat at Sedgwick County Zoo. You might be able to see those prairie dogs out there. We're going to talk about prairie dogs in just a few moments. But before that, we really need to talk about some of the other animals that might live in those prairie dog holes. One of the ones that can be the most surprising to people is this one right here. It's a bird, you're right. This is the burrowing owl. Now, if you look at our prairie dogs, you can see that they make tunnels that we call burrows. On top of every tunnel is a little mound. They use those mounds because they like to sit up tall and be able to look around and make sure that there's no predators, animals that might want to eat them. The burrowing owl takes advantage of that. The burrowing owl will sit on top of those mounds and do the same thing. It will look around and see if it can find anything to eat. Now, the burrowing owl doesn't eat prairie dogs. They're a little too big for the burrowing owl. But the burrowing owl will eat smaller mammals. It might eat some small lizards, and it loves to eat insects as well. So without prairie dogs, animals like the burrowing owl wouldn't have homes, because think of its name, burrowing. When an animal burrows, it goes underground. So the burrowing owl, instead of flying up into the trees at night, it goes down into the tunnels at night. And you might say to yourself, wait a minute, Miss Shanae, you just said at night. Aren't owls active at night? Most owls are, but not the burrowing owl. The burrowing owl is diurnal. That means it's active during the day. Most owls are nocturnal, which means they're active at night. The burrowing owl is the creative one that does things a little bit different. So it's out and active during the day, and instead of flying up into the trees at night, it goes underneath those prairie dog burrows. Now, there's another animal that depends on the prairie dog burrow. It's this one right here. Now, again, you might say, well, Miss Shanae, what is that? This is the shell of an ornate box turtle. Now, it doesn't have the browns and the greens and the blacks on it simply because those pieces have fallen off the shell. But the shell is an amazing part of the turtle because when I turn it to the other side, what do you notice? Inside the shell, you see their backbone. The only way for a turtle to lose its shell is to lose its life. Just like you can't live without your backbone, a turtle can't live without its backbone either. And box turtles in western Kansas live a lot better when they can be near a prairie dog town, because what they do is they will also go down into those prairie dog tunnels and sleep during the winter and look for insects and other things to eat as well. So they use those prairie dog towns a lot to make sure that they have all the resources they need. Now, I know you guys are all pretty sharp out there, and you know that our ornate box turtle is our Kansas state reptile as well. So a pretty important animal that can be found all over our states. We love our ornate box turtles. Now, we've talked about birds, we've talked about reptiles. We're going to talk about a mammal we can find up there in that Arikara area as well. Guys, this is another one that completely depends on those black-tailed prairie dogs for their survival. This is the black-footed ferret. Okay, black-footed ferrets, you can see they get their name. They have black feet. They're also sometimes called bandits because if you look at that face, they have that black line across their eyes. Now you might say, oh, Miss Shanae, I've seen these in the pet store before. You've seen what they call domestic ferrets or polecats, but you've never seen a black-footed ferret. This is one of the most endangered mammals in all of North America. At one time, we even thought they were extinct. Now, you guys know extinct means gone forever, no longer alive. The black-footed ferret was thought to be extinct until a rancher's dog named Shep found one in Wyoming, brought it home, and that rancher looked at that and thought, well, that's an odd-looking animal. I wonder what it is. He brought it into a town to a friend to look at, and by God, the black-footed ferret came back from the dead and was found. Now, after that first finding, what happened is the population, the prairie dog population, and the black-footed ferret population got sick from something we vaccinate our dogs for called distemper. When they got sick, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service had to decide to take every black-footed ferret in the world that was left and bring them into human care. From there were 7 animals that were able to breed and make baby ferrets. Today, I'm excited to say the black-footed ferret has been released back into some of its native habitats, including right here in Kansas. So if you're in western Kansas, you always have the opportunity out on the range. You might be one of just a few hundred people in the world that has the opportunity to see the black-footed ferrets. Now, one of the reasons they become endangered is because they depend on prairie dogs and prairie dog towns for their survival. Not only do they live in the prairie dog burrows, but almost everything they eat are prairie dogs. About 90%, about 97% of everything a black-footed ferret eats are prairie dogs. So they need to have those healthy prairie dog towns in order for them to survive as well. So lots and lots of really interesting animals living up in those chalk pyramids and that Arikara Break area of Kansas, also known as the Badlands of Kansas. Now we're going to switch to a little bit of a different habitat, and we're going to go south central Kansas. In the south central Kansas, instead of those short grass prairies, we have mixed grass prairies. In the mixed prairies, you can see some short grass, some semi-tall, and then every now and again some really tall grasses. In those mixed species, in that mixed grass prairie, one of the animals that is really, really common is the prairie dog, like we have behind us. So we've talked a lot about some of the animals that depend on the prairie dog. We're going to focus a little bit more just on prairie dogs right now. You can see a couple of them up and about. So prairie dogs live in colonies. Colonies are towns. Those towns can stretch for miles and miles and miles. And boys and girls, because we have prairie dogs here in our state, and generally if you have one, you have hundreds, what happens is we think they're common and they're still found everywhere. Truth be told, about 97% of all prairie dog populations have disappeared. Is that a lot or a little? I think it's a lot. But because they're here in our state and because we get to see them, we think they're everywhere. But in truthfulness, their populations are declining a lot. Now, prairie dogs are often called a flagship species of the prairie. What that means is lots and lots of other animals depend on prairie dogs for their survival. We already met the box turtle and the burrowing owl and the black-footed ferret that all utilize prairie dog towns for their survival. We also have lots of other animals, though, like hawks and swift fox that depend on those prairie dogs for their survival as well. So a lot of scientists say if the prairie dogs disappear, the prairie will disappear as well. Now you might look at this and say, well, Miss Shanae, how did they build those mounds? It's one of the funniest things I've ever seen. What happens is when it rains, I know we've all forgotten, guys, but it really will rain in Kansas every now and again. When it rains and the dirt gets wet, it's muddy. Just like we like to play in the mud, the prairie dogs play in the mud as well. They just do it with a little bit more purpose. They will dig out those tunnels and then they take their heads and they pound their heads into the dirt to make those mounds. The reason that they like those mounds, one, they can sit on top of the mounds and look around so they're a little bit higher. But two, think of the mounds as a wind guard. If one thing happens in Kansas, it's that the wind blows. And as the wind blows, if they didn't have those little mounds, all that wind could go into those tunnels a little bit and make them a little bit colder. So the mounds help them see better, help keep them a little bit warmer, and it can also keep them a little bit drier because when it rains, the water could go into those holes, but with the mounds, they don't. Now, one of the neatest geographical areas of Kansas in that South Central is the Red Hills. Now, if I say it's the Red Hills of Kansas, what do you picture in your mind? You probably got it right. They are hills that are red rock formations. So the soil is a little bit redder, the rock is a little bit redder, and it's made of a lot of gypsum. Gypsum's the type of rock that you can see there. So when the wind blows and has taken away the main soil from those areas, it leaves a lot of different red rock formations. Now, in this mixed grass areas, it's sometimes one of the best places for us to be able to find pollinators. Pollinators can be a lot of different things, but here in Kansas, we generally think of pollinators as insects. Now, right now, you might be seeing some of the monarchs pass through. Monarchs don't live in our state all the time, but they do migrate through. Monarchs are great pollinators. But in my hands, I have a cast of another great pollinator that many of you guys know about. This is the bee. Now, there are lots and lots of different kinds of bees. As a matter of fact, there's over 100 kinds of bees. Not all of them make honey, but the honeybee does. I always love the honeybee because they make a little for them and a little for me. And there's nothing better than on my peanut butter toast in the morning than a little bit of honey as well. What happens with bees as they pollinate, many of you guys know this, they jump from flower to flower, and bees are fuzzy. So when they go from flower to flower, the pollen, that dust on the flower, gets stuck to their hairy little bodies. When they go to the next flower, some of the dust from the first flower falls off, and that is how the flower pollinates. That's how that helps it make its fruit, which helps it makes the seeds so that that plant can continue to regenerate. So our pollinators are some of the most important animals on the prairie. They not only provide food for the prairies, they provide food for us. Without pollinators, we wouldn't have pumpkins this time of year. We wouldn't have strawberries in the spring. We wouldn't even have almonds to eat. And although we don't grow almonds in Kansas, it's still one of my favorite things to eat. So again, that Red Hills area in South Central Kansas has lots and lots of really cool things. Now we're going to take a step up. We've talked about the short grass prairies that are about a foot tall. We talked about the mixed grass prairies that can have short to medium. We're going to go big this time. We're going to go all the way up to those tall grass prairie areas. So if mixed grass prairies are in here, tall grass prairies are way above me. Now I'm about 5'7", put about 3 more feet on me, and you'll be getting close to what the tall grass prairie is. It is an amazing ecosystem, and right here in Kansas, we are so lucky to have one of the last areas of tall grass prairie left in North America. That's the Tall Grass Prairie Preserve that's part of the Flint Hills here in Kansas. Now, guys, I have traveled all over the world. And every time I come back to Kansas, the one thing I remind myself, there is no place that's more beautiful in the world than the Flint Hills. There are places that are just as beautiful and just as cool. But the Flint Hills, wow, that is an amazing area. And in our Flint Hills, we can see all sorts of different animals, one of which is one of our prairie icons. We talked about the prairie dog. But boys and girls, what in the world could I have here? Can you see this? This is the hide from a bison. Now, you notice I said bison and not buffalo. Bison are native to North America. Buffalo are native to Asia and Africa. They have a few things that are similar on them in that they're about the same size, they're about the same shape, and they're about the same colors. But bison have a couple of different things. One, look at all this fur. Can you see all that? They're really, really thick. Bison have this nice thick hide to keep them warm in the winter. Buffalo have a thinner hide regardless. Also, when we look at a bison's head, one of the things you'll notice is a bison have horns that come from the sides of their head and go up. Buffalo have horns on the top of their head and then go down. In the Flint Hills with those tall grasses, bison reign as the ruler. They are the largest animal of the prairie, and historically, there were millions of bison out there. Now, guys, unfortunately, humans helped the bison almost disappear. That's not a good thing. But there were a couple of conservationists out there, people that wanted to help protect the bison, that luckily realized what was happening and were able to save the species. However, they didn't know the best way to do that. So one of the things that they did was that they mixed bison with cattle to try and grow them quicker and faster. Today, we've realized that and realize that even though sometimes an animal that might look just like a bison still has some genetics from cattle in them. So we at Sedgwick County Zoo work along with some other zoos and Nature Conservancy to make sure that the purebred bison are the ones that are being bred the most. So when you go out to, say, the Tall Grass Prairie Preserve or Konza Prairie, you know you're looking at bison that are 100% bison. Neat grazers that can be found out in those areas. So in our Flint Hills area, we can certainly on the grasslands be able to see the bison. But also in the central areas, we have some other areas as well. Raise your hand if you love birds. I do. And here in our state, you guys are lucky because we are part of the Central Flyway. The Central Flyway is a highway that birds take, and our highway is one of the best. In that highway, then, we have some areas in the central area of Kansas that are great stopovers for those birds. Quivira and Cheyenne Bottoms are both perfect areas for birds to be able to live while they're traveling through Kansas. Some of you might know some of those birds. One of them that lives with us year-round is this one right here. Raise your hand if you've ever seen the western meadowlark. Now, raise your hands if you've ever heard The western meadowlark. Boys and girls, I bet most of you went, oh, yeah, I've heard that before. So the western meadowlark is one of those animals that is a really great animal to have. But it's one of our smaller animals. Guess what? In our prairie, in those prairie potholes, we can also have bigger animals. You may be amazed to look at this one. This is the skull, the head from a pelican. Yes, we have pelicans here in Kansas. If you're here in Sedgwick County, you can even go up to Cheney Reservoir and be able to see the pelicans there. So in our wetlands areas in central Kansas, we can see lots and lots of amazing birds that are there. So we have gone through our states looking at shortgrass prairie, tallgrass prairie, mixed prairie, but there's a couple of other areas here in the state as well. And one is all the way down in that northeast section of Kansas. There's a great area there called the Schrimmerhorn Cave. In that area, what we can see is grasses kind of give way to trees. We start into that Ozark area. And in that area, some of the things we can sometimes see are even animals like this. Now, boys and girls, first you might go, oh, that must be a raccoon. It's not a raccoon. It is a very unusual animal called a ringtail. Ringtails are animals that will live towards central and southeastern Kansas areas. They're very nocturnal, very solitary, and like to live up in the trees in areas where it's sometimes hard for people to see. So you never know what you're going to find. Now, also in that southeast section of Kansas, we couldn't talk about Kansas without talking about our Kansas state tree. First of all, some of you guys might be familiar with looking at these kind of heart-shaped leaves. You might recognize the sound that the leaves make. This is from the cottonwood. The cottonwood is our state tree, but here's what you may not have known. I hope we can zero in on that enough. Earlier today, we broke one of the dry cottonwood branches. What do you see in there? It's our very own star. So the cottonwoods pulp, the inside matter of the tree, when you break a dry one, there's a star inside. Just one of the really neat aspects. You can see here, this is what one of those cottonwood branches looks like. Let's see if I can get a clean break right here. Nope. Sometimes if you get a really clean break like that, you can open it up and see that star inside. So today, oh, and the cave. We talked about the Schrimmerhorn Cave. The Schrimmerhorn Cave is a really interesting formation that is in southeast Kansas. Here's what's crazy. It is a cave above ground. And you're saying, Miss Shanae, what? A cave above ground? Instead of having to go underneath the ground, it is a mound that basically has been opened up through wind and through stream beds. So today you can get into the mouth of the cave, but no further than that. But definitely a super fun area to visit in Kansas. Now guys, we've traveled all over the state. We've looked at plants, we've looked at animals, and we've looked at some of those features, those really cool things that can be found in Kansas. As I mentioned at the beginning, our Prairie Puzzle program is brought to you by the Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks Chickadee Checkoff. Through that grant, this program is available at no cost to any school within Sedgwick County. So teachers, if you're out there and you're thinking, wow, I'd like to know more about this, give the Sedgwick County Zoo Education Department a call. We would love to set up a free program for you on learning more about the Prairie Puzzle. Thanks, everybody, and let's see if we have any questions.
We most certainly do. We have a couple of minutes left.
Okay.
The first question that I have is, what is the most common type of grass in each different type of prairie, or in the prairie?
Oh, so in our short grass prairies, that buffalo grass is by far the most common. In that mixed grass prairie, we'll see buffalo grass. We might also see some Indian grass. And then on the tall grass prairies, we could see that big blue stem, which is really fun to look at as well. That was a great question. Good job loving those plants.
What is your favorite animal in the prairie?
I'm kind of a nerd. I love bats. And I know we haven't talked about bats at all, but we have about 16 species of bats that live here in Kansas. Most of us always think bats have to live in caves. Some bats might live in caves, but they'll also live in trees. They'll live in burrows and even old buildings. So I love our bats that are here in Kansas.
Nice. How many prairie dogs are at the Sedgwick County Zoo?
A lot. A lot of prairie dogs. As a matter of fact, we don't have a really great way of counting the prairie dogs, but we know there's well over 100 prairie dogs here.
There's actually only like 85 right now because we just trapped some to send to other zoos.
So one of our keepers just hollered at us that said that right now we just sent some prairie dogs out to some other zoos. We sent about 40 prairie dogs out to a few different zoos. So we're running at about 85 prairie dogs right now. I always love to joke, if you go to any zoo in the United States and they have prairie dogs, chances are they came from us.
Wow. What's the current estimated population of the black-footed ferrets?
Another great question. So here in the state of Kansas, we think there is under 30 black-footed ferrets living in the state, but tomorrow we start actually doing a survey on ferrets where we'll go out at night for several days, spotlighting or looking for ferrets. So we'll have a better idea. Population as a whole, there's around, we believe, just under 500 ferrets now, black-footed ferrets in the world, including those that are still in human care.
And the last question, what is more important, a prairie dog or a ferret?
Well, I'm going to have to say the prairie dog because without the prairie dog, there wouldn't be ferrets.
All right. Well, thank you guys at the Sedgwick County Zoo and Sedgwick County for this program that teachers can sign up for and for presenting to all of our students around the state.
Thank you, everybody.
Have a great day.